Hey guys, Trafotin here. In a rare turn of events, I get to review a device I got to tinker with this week, the System76 Darter Pro 9. Using the System76 Darter Pro has been one of the most interesting experiences of a laptop that I ever had. It melds seamlessly with Linux and is one of the most unique laptops I have ever used. It feels like a open, fresh, and yet a powerful and cohesive experience, especially when you compare to using Linux on other computers. Now, before we get started and before you get too excited, this computer is not mine. This device belongs to a family member in need of a new computer. System76 didn't pay for the review, and while I didn't pay for this myself, I was using someone else's money. So in a way, I had to spend someone else's money on their behalf to make sure that this computer does what it needs to. I took a stab in the dark to see what the experience was like, and the Darter Pro has not disappointed in bringing what I feel is one of the best ways to use Linux onto a computer, to the point where I am now sold on a concept of a computer that is constructed with the goal of running Linux specifically in mind. So when I first got the Darter Pro came in a cardboard box, which seems like an upgrade if you see videos from other creators with the same box from last year, but it has a handle this time, and there's no decoration on the inside. Not only that, the laptop comes with a padded foam and plastic cover. All in all, you're getting a computer pretty similar to other flagship computers that you'd see from Dell and Lenovo, with a bit of a little Linuxy twist. You're also probably wondering how you actually get this laptop. Well, you actually just go to System76's website and buy the laptop. I was actually able to get a $50 discount, and I'll talk about the configuration in a little bit, but the total price of the computer was around $1,163 US. Also, for some reason, they just gave me a t-shirt for free, and they also support lots of shirt sizes. Which, you know, the t-shirt's alright, it's far from one of the worst things I've ever worn, and I can't say that I'm the biggest fan of Pop! OS, but I'll be wearing the t-shirt for the rest of this review. The computer comes provided with a little welcome card telling you to unleash your potential, including a quick little message about where you can get help online from System76's social media pages or their support page. They even give a little cardboard standout character named Melvin, which, okay, but it's a little questionable to include to begin with. When you include little figurines like these, the cardboard's actually really easily damaged, and unfortunately I think Melvin here is going to be staying in his little frame and I'm probably never going to take him out. Funnily enough, they also gave various branded Pop! OS and System76 stickers, which in previous iterations of this computer used to just be individual stickers packed up in the envelope, but now they are in two solid sheets together because when you empty them from the envelope, they're actually kind of easy to lose, especially if they were individual stickers, so I think they learned their lesson this time. But you don't want to hear me prattle on about unboxing the computer, you want to learn about what the specs the computer has. On the left side of the computer, you get an HDMI port and a USB 3.0 port. You also have access to your USB-C and Thunderbolt ports. On the right, you have a headphone jack, a micro SD card slot, a USB 2 slot, and the power button with its corresponding LEDs, an Ethernet port, and your Kensington lock. I am going to dock at one points for a few things. First off, I don't think there's a lot of point in having a USB 2 slot. The USB 2 slot, I think we are way past this point in life. I'm honestly surprised that this isn't a USB 3.0 slot. But on top of that, the computer still uses a barrel jack charger, and I am seriously going to be docking points for this one. The computer already comes with USB-C ports and a Thunderbolt port, and please, for the love of all things holy, just replace the barrel charger with a USB-C port. I don't think anyone would be complaining. And I did actually apply some customization when I actually bought the computer. So you can actually spend extra money to upgrade various parts of the computer, or you can buy off-the-shelf parts in some place like Newegg or Amazon to manually upgrade your computer yourself. So for example, if you wanted an extra NVMe drive, you could actually go and buy your own NVMe drive and slot it into the computer. And in order to future-proof the build a little bit, this actually is what influenced me to choose what I did when I picked the configuration of the computer, which you can actually do when you start buying the computer by investing a little extra money. I selected the 16GB DDR5 RAM and the 1TB NVMe drive. I have been worried about the growing memory requirements of just doing basic things in a web browser, but I'm also leaving the door open in case something drastic happens to software in the future, so there's a little bit of breathing room and the laptop will have an extended period of life. By default on the website, the Dart Pro comes with 250 gigabytes of storage, and while this is enough for my family member right now, I did push for the 1 terabyte storage upgrade. Microsoft is famous for offering a 1 terabyte storage in OneDrive, and I chose that much because I wanted to leave enough breathing room for my family members so they can store business documents and all the media and any items of interest that they have, but also so that they can store things like family photos and home videos, not just in the future, but in decades past. Now, I would be remiss without discussing the firmware. System76 isn't one of the only manufacturers to do so, but all motherboards from System76 computers come pre-configured with Core Boot. You have companies like Star Labs and Tuxedo, heck, even Google's Chromebooks all use it. But one of the things that makes System76 unique is that they have a custom BIOS with Core Boot, and to be honest, I actually have really mixed feelings about this. On one hand, the BIOS are fully open source and can be upgraded for free using System76's firmware tool. And this actually means that you will get guaranteed motherboard updates for years to come. And if you actually look on the website, support for this firmware is still going on, which compared to a lot of Windows OEMs is a breath of fresh air. System76 also disables the Intel management engine. Well, okay, they don't completely disable it, but it's heavily neutered to a point where it only does what it needs to. I consider Core Boot the more important part of making a secure device here, because using Core Boot will guarantee that the device will get firmware updates from years to come, and System76 has had a good track record with this. And that's definitely way more important than shooting the Intel management engine, which may or may not even be a security risk for the vast majority of people. It's a bigger priority that you get your updates and to resolve your firmware issues than use a proprietary system that's typically only abused in really targeted attacks and will probably never be done towards normal people. While I do enjoy the fact that the firmware is open source and given a long life from System76's support, I need to be brutally honest about the way the firmware operates today. System76's firmware has Secure Boot disabled by default, which has to be the biggest L, because pop !_OS is an Ubuntu-based distribution, which should support Secure Boot out of the box because Canonical pays for a Microsoft shim key. Furthermore, if you read their documentation about System76's other computers, they claim that Secure Boot is not recommended. System76, please stop this. Ubuntu fully supports Secure Boot. Therefore, why can't Pop! OS support Secure Boot out of the box when you give people their computers? We need to be pushing people to use Secure Boot because it's part of what makes a secure system. But it's also for the people who want to use something like Windows 11. I mean, we'll get to Windows 11 soon enough. But this is where the plot thickens. You can turn on Secure Boot after a quick reboot, but one of the things that actually really irks me is that there's not a lot of customization you can do. Typically, a lot of other motherboards let you customize little things in your computer, like say your fan speed, or whether your computer supports virtualization or not, locking down USB ports. You don't get those kinds of options in a System76 machine, and that's kind of a little weird. But the one thing that really took that over the edge is the fact that you can't password protect the BIOS. Now, someone did open an issue on System76's GitHub, and with their defense in terms of protecting user data, full disk encryption, which is heavily pushed by default on Pop! OS, will get the job done of protecting users' information. But it's honestly shocking to me that the firmware touted as being open source is probably a little too open. You don't want the local housemaid plugging and booting arbitrary USB devices in your machine. Speaking of other weird subcategories, let's talk about Windows. Hang on a second, wasn't this video about System76 and how they run Linux on their computers? Well, one of the unique things about the Dart Pro 9 and other System76 machines from this generation is that they're able to run Windows 11 out of the box with no major modifications. Of course, you do need to have Secure Boot enabled, but you can just boot into Windows 11 just fine. Well, without some other problems. For one, I did notice that the touchpad will not function at all when you're in the Windows installer. I actually had to get an external mouse just to click through the buttons because, yes, Windows requires that you use a mouse to click buttons in their installer, unlike Linux. On top of that, the touchpad still didn't work when I first booted into Windows and ran through the initial installation process. However, when I ran Windows Update, the touchpad started working again. But even when it started working, it would just randomly stop working. So turns out that it's a Microsoft problem because of the Intel touchpad drivers, and it will frequently spit out errors in the registry basically saying it doesn't work. And I don't blame System76 or Intel for this. Go blame Microsoft for ruining people's lives. If you want to use a laptop to dual boot Linux and Windows, at this time I don't think it's the right call. But we're done with Windows, let's talk about an operating system. The Darter Pro comes with Pop! OS or Ubuntu, whichever one you choose when you first buy your computer. I don't care about these options because I think we can all make the assumption because a lot of reviewers actually do reviews based on how Pop! OS works in comparison of their machine. But come on guys, let's be honest, System76 expects people to be using Pop! OS because it's the default on their store and it's their distribution. And I want to test a real distribution, not some LTS distribution. I want a rolling release distribution. No offense to System76, but I actually want something that supports secure boot out of the box. So what are our options? Well, there's actually a support article on System76's website that provides tutorials for various Linux distributions that are officially supported by their developers. So for example, you can use Arch Linux, for example, using a package to download items from the AUR. You can also use Fedora's Copper repos and use a third-party repository which is maintained by one of System76's employees. And one of the more interesting things is they actually have a native NixOS package. So if you're a NixOS user, all you have to do is add one line to your configuration file and you're up and running. Of the given distributions here, I chose Fedora as a distribution to give to my family member. Well, it's because it's what they were using anyway. Fedora XFCE, actually, to be more specific. At the time, I provided Fedora XFCE because it was a full desktop experience for a low-performance environment, when you're literally running off of spinning Rust, an ancient Celeron, and 4 gigabytes of RAM. But no more. We have a capable computer now, and I believe it's time for someone close to what they know, like XFCE or Windows 7, but something that adopts future trends with increased security. And that's why I chose Fedora KDE, because of the similarities it has to things like XFCE or Windows 7. But not only that, KDE supports Wayland, and XFCE still does not support Wayland. It's because it's time to get people on the bandwagon for the future. So what is actually using this computer like? Well, first off, as an accessibility note, you can open the laptop with one hand, but it does require a little bit of extra force, and it definitely feels better opening it with two. The frame isn't weak and generally feels pretty solid, so opening the laptop is not too easy, but it's honestly not that difficult either. The touchpad also feels pretty good. It's not Apple's level of polish, but it certainly gets the job done, and gestures actually work really great if you use something like GNOME or KDE. The one major downside about the laptop's build quality isn't even things like the keyboard, because the keyboard's honestly fine. There's a little bit of flex, but you know, not much that you'd expect from any other quality laptop. But the one thing that I have to comment about is the material that the laptop itself is made out of. It's made out of a magnesium aluminum chassis, and this thing smudges really, really easily. In fact, after just a couple hours of use, my fingerprints and smeared dead skin became more and more visible on this thing as time went on. This is honestly probably the most negative thing I have to say about this laptop. And it might honestly be less noticeable if they keep using this material, but if they made the material silver or white instead of black, because it shows a lot more on the black rather than on the silver than what you see on Dell and HP's computers, for example. The computer also isn't too heavy. It weighs about 3 pounds, about a little over 1 kilogram for my overseas neighbors. And this is actually the heaviest build because my family member requested to buy a model with the largest screen possible for a workstation computer. And no graphics card because they just use Excel and LibreOffice. It's not too interesting. The Darter Pro in particular has a 15.6-inch screen, or 40 centimeters, and a 60 Hz LCD display. And this wide display was the largest one out of every model the System76 offered. The color settings of the display are also pretty good, and color often doesn't feel out of place. But not only does the color really good, the screen also has anti-glare on it, and it does a really good job at diffusing ambient light, or if you're in a really bright room, or in outdoors for example. The speakers are okay, but they just don't seem to handle bass particularly well. However, despite not being able to handle bass, they're able to just convey a scene properly, and it's pretty much 80% there for most people. And this is where I actually tried to stress test this machine a little bit. The battery life is approximately around 9 hours, and I did deplete the battery to about 30% as an estimation, so it's probably not the most optimal test, but this 9 hours is brought down to about half if you're going to be doing something like just constantly watching YouTube videos. And speaking of stress testing, I wanted to pick a video game to play on this thing. But it was really tricky because you have to pick a video game that doesn't require a GPU and can still play competently on something of integrated graphics while still being a modern game that can be used to sort of see where this thing is at. The Darter Pro comes with 13th gen Intel, and I decided to run The Witcher 3 Complete Edition with low settings. The frame rates are about the same as what you'd expect if you were running The Witcher 3's Nintendo Switch port, but at the worst, the frame rate would actually dip to about 16 or 20 FPS, namely in big city areas like in Novigrad or in the opening cutscene area of the Wild Hunt. I'll give the Darter Pro a pass here though, because clearly this is a workstation machine. It wasn't really meant for gaming. Because that's what this machine does really well. System76's Darter Pro offers a unique workstation experience geared towards running Linux. And I only had a few days to really play with this one and power through some of the things that I really wanted to see. And I have just been thoroughly impressed with just the overall experience and the smoothness of how Linux operates. There are a few caveats though, like the firmware definitely needs some work and changes to the defaults to enable things like secure boot, password protecting the BIOS, or even managing System76's power drivers. But overall, I think it provides a fantastic workstation experience. If you're a writer, a developer, or just a general user, I think you would enjoy using the Darter Pro, especially if you're not into something like gaming. I would recommend this computer if you are a die-hard user, dedicated to the open firmware experience, and you want to support a company that's pushing those boundaries, especially when you hear that they're making their own laptop. Just the only thing that I would have to mention is I just want a USB-C charger, and I would like the money to be invested into something like another magnesium aluminum alloy that doesn't smudge as bad as the current one. But overall, I think the System76 Darter Pro is a great computer to use. And this is not sponsored, and if you want to see more of these videos and fund my stupid little games, please, why don't you go like this video? Like this video if you would like to see more shenanigans with System76's computers. And subscribe or donate money to me if you want to help fund the trouble. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your week.